So I've set up this call to hopefully for us to just explore the relationship between a seasoned interim like yourself and an interim recruiter, so that we can help people just sort of guide their way through that path and how to best manage that relationship. So just to kick off, so I'm Peter Dewbery, so I'm an interim recruiter for Hunter Healthcare. As the name suggests, we specialise in the healthcare market, so primarily that's working with the NHS, but we do work with the wider public sector and also private healthcare providers as well. And I specialise in interim data and BI roles, so that covers everything from business intelligence to data warehousing, developers, that sort of thing. And I'm here with David, so yeah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm David Estyn-Jones. I've been an interim for about 10 years now, specialising in transformation programmes, programme leadership across different sectors, with a sort of sweet spot probably in retail and consumer, but have worked in all sorts of different sectors as well.
Great, thank you. So yeah, David, obviously you've been an interim for quite some time. So I guess to start with, what's your relationship like with interim recruiters?
Well, good question. I suppose it depends. I mean, there are a fair amount of recruiters who I have been speaking to and know for 10 years or so. I've got, I would say, fairly decent relationships with them. I know what they do, what they specialise in, and critically for me, they know what I do and what I specialise in. And I'm always trying to make sure that with all the sort of decent interim companies who recruit for people like me, that there are people there who understand what I do and how I do it. And so when a suitable role comes up, you know, they're going to be on the phone to me as opposed to somebody else, or I'll be at least one of the people that they will call and get on a shortlist. And they're long-term relationships. So I think the key thing is you don't get in touch with a recruiter and expect them necessarily to have the right role for you right then and there, but it might be 5-10 years down the line that you get a phone call, the sort of stars collide, if you like, and then and something happens and you get you get a contract out of it.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, and probably the most important thing is to understand for people who are interims out there and recruiters that it is a relationship. It's not,
Yes.
I'm sure there are transactional recruiters out there, but certainly the ones I would say it's best to get in with are the ones who obviously know about you, understand what your strengths are, what your expertise are, your weaknesses as well, perhaps. But ultimately, it's the ones who know where you would best fit in and what sort of environment is best for you as an interim. I always think if I'm calling you to sort of pitch a role at you, then one of two things has happened. Either I've not done my job properly because I don't know about you and what your skills are and all those sort of important factors. It could be that you've perhaps not marketed yourself, and there could be a number of reasons for that. Maybe you've been in a role for a number of years and you've just not really been keeping tabs on the market because you haven't had to. You've perhaps not, kept things like your LinkedIn page up to date and not had your CV in front of the right people. But ultimately, that's where I can add value to the transaction is knowing all about you and what your skills are and where you'll land best. Because essentially, my job is spending 8 hours a day understanding where the challenges are on the market and where the needs are to put good people in. I think that's probably the key thing, is to understand that it is a relationship, and there's a number of ways that obviously you can make that relationship thrive on both sides, as the recruiter and as the interim. I guess maybe let's start there with as an interim. How do you sort of market yourself, and what tips would you give someone who perhaps is looking to launch on the interim market, or perhaps just is approaching the need for a new role?
Yeah, it's probably the hardest thing for someone to work out. I mean, lots of people, when they go into interim management, I think they get they get caught up on some of the technicalities of how do I set up a limited company? How do I find an accountant? How do I sort out my VAT or whatever? And that's all important stuff. But the key thing is, what do you do? What value do you add? What problems do you solve? What is your value proposition, if you like? Now, this sounds really obvious, but to a lot of people, when you say to them, well, what do you do? What you get back is about 5 minutes of waffle that doesn't really make sense. It sort of tells you a little bit about the sort of things they've done, but it doesn't really say, look, this is me, this is what I do, this is what I'm good at. And I think that's a really, really important starting point, that you need to have a good understanding of what it is you do, and also what you don't do. I think it's very easy to be distracted into well, I could do that and I could do that. But if that's not your sort of core strength, that's not really how you want to put yourself forward. And I always say, think of yourself as a product on a supermarket shelf. What is what's the blurb you write on the front of your product that makes it really clear to someone who's shopping what it is you do and why how you do it, if you like. So it's the clarity of that message is really, really key. And I find it took me probably a few years to get to that place, because I'd done all sorts of different things in my career beforehand. And I sort of came in with an attitude of, well, yeah, I could do that. I can do that. I can do that. But that didn't help people help people like you to say, well, I understand him and I understand he'll be a good fit for this and he won't be a good fit for that. And that's really what you want to get to, is that the recruiter has they're talking to a client, the client's starting to brief them on a role, and names start popping up in their head, and you're one of them because you're a good fit, because they understand what you do and it fits well with that opportunity. So I think it's getting that clarity of the value proposition. It sounds obvious, but it's so important, and it's really something that I think is worth revisiting regularly, because it does sort of shift and change over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that the word niche gets bandied around a lot, but it is really important that you're very specific about what it is you do and what you're good at, most importantly. Because like you said, when a client's talking to me, it's very rare that a client will come to me looking for a generalist, right? Usually they're coming to me because they've got a very specific challenge that they need solving, and they need someone with those specialist skills to solve that challenge. So it's my job to know who the best people are on the market that can solve those challenges. And it's a difficult thing for an interim, because you don't want to limit your opportunities, right? So I always think that the hardest interims for me to place are the ones who come to me and say, well, I can do everything, whatever the challenge is, put me forward for it and I'll be able to do it. And it's great, and I'm sure there are people out there who can sort of turn their hand to everything, but that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for someone who can solve this specific challenge. And of course, flexibility is something we'll come on to, which everyone needs to be flexible. There's very rarely going to be a role which is 100% of your skills and capabilities going to match to it, but equally it's knowing those sort of core disciplines that you are best at, and also you are the best at. Because as a recruiter, when I'm working on a role, I've only got a limited number of shots at placing someone into that role. We are specialist recruiters, so it's our job to know who the best people are. And usually with a role, we wouldn't want to be putting forward more than 4 or 5 candidates at most. We want to be saying, these are the best 3 or 4 options. Which one of these do you want? We don't want to be sending forward 100 CVs, because there's roles out there that, I speak to people all the time who do permanent recruitment for sort of lower banding roles, and they're getting like 250 applications, and you can tell that by the time they've got to their 40th CV, they lose interest, really. And that's again why interim recruiters are there, because we're specialists and we want to place specialist people. So yeah, and I think that probably leads on to my first top tip as a recruiter to an interim, is making sure that the recruiter you're working with, or number of recruiters, I know I'm not the only one out there, know what's best on your CV. And also keeping your CV up to date, and things like your LinkedIn page is really important, so that we can identify where you've done similar projects or similar roles in the past, and ultimately if you've delivered on them. Yeah, great. Okay, so I guess leading on from that relationship thing, the other thing I wanted to say is that it's really important that you cultivate that relationship whilst you're in a contract and not just whilst you're looking for your next role. So yeah, how do you sort of manage that relationship when you're, let's say you've got 9 months left on your contract? What do you do about sort of making sure you're behaving in that way there?
Yeah, so it's very easy to basically hibernate. You get a contract, and I'd say mine are typically 6 months to 9 months. I've had a few shorter ones, I've had a few longer ones, but it's sort of around that type of period. And within that, you might have a number of points at which you're extended or your role is, expanded or whatever. I sort of take every opportunity to try and keep people informed. So I have personally, I have a spreadsheet of recruiters who, and key contacts who, work in the sort of areas that I'm interested in. And I try and make sure I'm updating them. So number one, my LinkedIn profile will be up to date, and I, make sure my availability is visible on my LinkedIn profile. But also I'll take the opportunity to send a quick email update or have a catch up with people, which is quite hard to do when you're head down in the middle of a contract. But it is really, really important. And I think having, if you've got to a place where you've had a good introduction to a recruiter, they've got to know you a little bit and you've got to know them, you've then got to build and nurture that relationship. It's no good thinking, well, I spoke to them 5 years ago, they know who I am. They will still call me. You've got to remain front of mind, and I think this is again really important. So little and often is probably the key. I'll quite happily send out an email to a number of people within a particular agency. If there's 3 or 4 people I speak to there, I don't think there's a problem with that. And I'll just say, look, quick update. I'm due to be available in October, or I've just been extended, looking to be available in 2 to 3 months, whatever it may be. And this is what I've been up to. Maybe send through an updated CV. So keep that going. And then when you do have a bit more time, that's maybe the time to have, try and book in either go and see people, a bit old fashioned, but it's always good to meet face to face, or set up a call like this and, have a chat on Teams to people and just give them a bit of an update. So, establish the relationship, build, nurture, continue the relationship, and try and stay front of mind. And the other thing that, particularly this year, it's been quite a torrid year in recruitment. I think a lot of the people I know at specific companies have moved on in the last year to 18 months. So you think 3 consultants at ABC Recruitment, suddenly 2 have left and 1's retired. You don't know anyone there, and they might be getting some great roles in. So always keep on top of that and keep checking and making sure where people are and and that you're in touch with them. So it's very much little and often in terms of maintaining those relationships.
Yeah, definitely. It's really important. Great. Well, the other thing I wanted to touch on, which you sort of mentioned there, is that sort of transparency piece as well. Because something I find a lot is that certainly with new potential candidates that I'm approaching, they want to be a bit guarded about a number of different things. And it's a sort of frustration of mine because I think it's maybe just down to an education piece that they don't understand why I need to know that information. But a lot of people will keep things close to their chest, things like their current day rate perhaps, or where they're working or what they're working on. And I appreciate that, some roles have that element where you can't talk about what you're working on. You might be with the MOD or something like that. But I would just say that the reason I'm asking questions like that is not necessarily just so I can sort of, let's say, value you as a candidate. And, if you're on £400 a day, I'm not going to put you forward for roles which are £700 a day. But it's so that I can understand what things you've been working on. And like I said, going back to our earlier point, is so that I can know, where you're best fit as well. So, yeah, what would you say about that when perhaps a recruiter like me is asking some probing questions that you're, let's say, perhaps a bit uncomfortable divulging, that you wouldn't, tell your group of your friendship circle, for example?
So, I mean, for me, I think there's certain things. Day rate, I'm always really transparent on that. But equally, I always make it clear that I'll work in a certain range, and that everything's open to a bit of negotiation. But here's my target. Here's where I'd like to be. I think in terms of what I've done, if it's in the past, then I've got no problems talking about it. I think there's and let's face it, we all probably know the odd recruiter who wants to find out where you are, and has never been particularly keen to talk to you for 5 years, and now suddenly you've moved to this company. They're your best friend, and they suddenly want to get to know you, and that's always a tricky one. I think most of the people I work with, aren't like that. They're not the sort of transactional, slightly, that they're not that type of recruiter, so it's never a problem. So yeah, I think a bit of transparency is fine, and I think understanding the relationship is key. So as we've said previously, I want a recruiter to understand me and what I'm good at, and I want that to be clear enough so that when they're talking to a potential client, that it's my name that pops into their head for a suitable opportunity. I think as well, the other thing that I think is really important to understand is the relationship. I don't pay your bills, or I don't pay the recruiter's bills. The client does. The recruiter is not there to find me a job. The recruiter is there to find a suitable candidate for their client. I am one of many. So I always take it with beyond basic courtesy. The recruiter does not owe me anything. It's on my shoulders to get my value proposition across them, to establish, to maintain the relationship. And the good ones reciprocate, of course. But equally, in a market, in a tricky market like we've got at the moment, there's a lot of candidates like me. There's not many opportunities. Their focus will be as much on delivery and winning new business as it will be on getting to know or keeping in touch with candidates. So I think understanding the dynamics of the relationship is really important. And I do often see people, throw their toys out of the pram when they feel they haven't been given the attention they deserve. And it's like, well, yeah, fine, but you don't really understand how this works for me. So yeah, I think those sort of things are worth bearing in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, let's move on. The other thing I wanted to cover is what we call diligence. As a recruiter, I might be talking to you as a potential new candidate for the first time. Obviously, part of my job, as I said, is knowing who the best people are on the market. When I'm putting forward people for a role, I need to be sure that they are going to deliver in that role. And one of the ways that I'd obviously do that is, speak to people that you've done that role before for, and, satisfy myself that I am putting forward the best person. So referencing is obviously really important to us at Hunter, and something we take a lot of care in, and we do a very thorough job when we're taking our diligence on a candidate. So as part of that first interaction, I might say to you, where have you done a similar role? Where have you proved yourself before? Who can I speak to that would, endorse you as a candidate and satisfy me that I'm, happy to put you forward for a role. So you mentioned there that you're quite happy talking about things in the past, and how do you approach it when a recruiter, perhaps one you've not worked for before, asks you about references?
Yeah, I think you have to be you have to be pretty open. I mean, I'm always happy to provide a bunch of names, and generally there's somebody, my sponsor, let's say, at previous roles, who I'll be happy to sort of pass on their details. I'll normally check with them first to make sure that they're happy to talk to someone. But yeah, absolutely, I think it's really, really important, and they can do a good job of marketing, for me if they're going to say something nice. So yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, it's a very good way of approaching every contract as well. of just bearing in mind, you might be here for 6 months. What is somebody going to say about you when you leave? And just to have that in the back of your mind, because it is, I think the impact that you have on an organisation is what people will remember, and hopefully that'll be a positive thing. So yeah, I mean, I try and make sure whenever I leave a contract to keep in touch, make sure there's somebody who will, a sponsor or line manager or whoever who will who will act as a reference. Yeah, I think it's definitely a powerful thing if you've got people who will advocate for your services.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you're quite right there. It should be sort of front and center as you go into a contract. It's thinking about who in this organisation is going to recommend me for my next role, or future roles like that. Obviously, as a recruiter who works in the NHS, we have to do referencing for the last 3 years. So we're going to be looking to speak to everyone you've worked for, just to satisfy that you did work there and you attended when you needed to. But ultimately, we need to make sure that you're good at what you do as well. So we reference the person as opposed to for the job. Obviously, we do have to tick those boxes and say, they were here for 6 months or whatever. But yeah, we'll be looking to speak to your previous line manager, whoever you reported into. And I think it's important to say as well that we only do that once. Once we've got that reference, we don't go back to them for each role and say, it's David again, he's up for another one, can we get another reference? We'd only be looking to do that once. But yeah, it is really important for us to make sure, we're working with the best people on the market. Great. And then, yeah, you touched earlier on day rate. What would be your advice to fellow interims, how they approach, maybe setting their day rate? Well,
I think the first time is always the hardest, because particularly if you're coming from a permanent career, it's hard sometimes to say, well, look, I used to earn this, and now what's my day rate going to be? What I would say is, don't necessarily believe anything you read about formulas, or working it out based on what your monthly outgoings might be. It's a market. It's a really dynamic market, but it is a market. The other thing I would say is that generally, I mean, we have seen over the last year that some day rates. I mean, I've seen some crazy low day rates recently, which is probably a little bit short-sighted, because people will literally get the worst possible candidates if you're paying the lowest possible rates. But so be it. But generally, if for example somebody wants a transformation director, and they're looking to, they think they're going to pay sort of £1,200-1,400 a day for it in the private sector, sort of decent, really decent chunky rate, you're not going to win that business just by discounting and saying, well, look, I'll do it for £700 a day. They want the right person. Now they might be more budget conscious, and they might be trying to push that down a bit, but you don't win the business by saying, look, I'll do it for half the price, because people want the quality, and they'll generally have the budget to pay for it. I think what I would say in terms of setting your day rate, talk to fellow interims. I'm always happy for people to get in touch and ask me about what I think. Have a look at what's being posted on LinkedIn, not in terms of job adverts, but you'll see recruiters post interim roles on LinkedIn. So just search for posts with interim opportunities, and you can get a sense. And I'd say talk to recruiters, because generally recruiters work off of a margin of the based on the day rate, or a markup of the day rate, whatever that may be. So a recruiter typically is not in the business of trying to reduce the day rate. And equally, they don't want to, you'll give an honest opinion about somebody's market value, because you don't want to overinflate it, because clearly you're not going to be able to place someone at a inflated, you're focused on cost for your value for your client. I think sometimes it's difficult if you've got a recruiter who is working on a set fee from which your day rate will be paid. But that's a different thing. But in an introductory conversation, and you say, well, look, I think my rate should be about this. What do you think? I'd say a recruiter will generally give you good advice on that. But remember, it is a market. It's not fixed. And what you earned last year might not be what you earn this year or next year. So it's very dynamic. And exactly as you were saying earlier, at the point where more roles start to become available and the best talent gets taken, those rates will start to shift pretty quick. And we've seen that before. So they're fairly low at the moment, but that could change in a few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just to re-emphasize your point there, I think that's again where I and my fellow recruiters can add a lot of value to the transaction, as well as we know what the market value is for yourself and your skills, and it's not in our interest to pitch roles at you that are way below what other people are making, and equally, if we put you forward for a role at £1,000 a day, we know other candidates are going in at £600 a day. There's an element of competitiveness in there, and we need to make sure you're being accurately remunerated for your time and your skills as well. So yeah, that's really important. And again, it's something you said there about that sort of being flexible as well. I think you should be really open and honest with the recruiters you're working with as to where your flexibilities lie. And I think that's a good piece of advice, is to have a range that you're willing to work below, because I don't want to waste your time and come to you with roles that are way below what I know you're prepared to work for. But again, it's me understanding your current circumstances. If you've been out of work for 9 months, then that rate might be a bit more flexible than it was. When you first entered the market.
Yeah, and I always think there's a few reasons why I'd go below my target. Number one, I'd always rather work than and work on a slightly lower rate than not work and hold out for a higher rate. I mean, if you do the maths over 6 months, if you spend a month of that 6 months waiting for a higher rate, then you probably could have earned the same in 6 months as opposed to 5. But the other thing is, if there's something that's a particularly interesting role that's going to give me new skills or access to a new sector or something that's really exciting or worthwhile, or it's something that I think is really interesting and valuable work, then again, there's definitely some work you enjoy more, you get more personal reward out of doing, rather than just the money. So I think where there can be flexibility, that those are the sort of things where you might choose to take a lower rate than you might otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, actually, that's quite an interesting point there you mentioned, is talking about your own development. Obviously, if you're in a permanent role, it's in the company or the organisation's benefit to develop you and grow your skills. When they've got someone coming in for an interim who's not going to be there long term, they obviously haven't got that incentive to develop you. So how do you develop your own sort of skills and abilities, other than taking on challenges that are perhaps a bit outside your comfort zone?
Yeah, it's good question. I think there's always got to be a little bit of learning in the margins. So whether that's in time between contracts or around contracts, and trying to develop what you do and your way of thinking. The other thing I find is that simply working on a different opportunity every 6-9 months, the exposure you get to different problems, to different opportunities, different challenges is massive, and is far more than you do necessarily in a permanent role, I think. So I've found, over my 10 years, I've had however many, 12, 13 different contracts, and within that there's been different parts of those contracts. So the amount of learning I've done in that time is massive, and that's purely from doing what often are broadly similar roles. I mean, I'd say interim is not the way to advance up the career ladder, but you probably get better and you really refine what you're doing. But yet, in terms of the learning, I think it's been significant, and the personal development. But you've also got to have that desire to learn, and I think this is the thing that particularly for older interims. I say older. I think that the average age of an interim in the UK is sort of mid-50s, but that's a time often in somebody's permanent career where they might be, counting the days until they shuffle off into retirement. For an interim, you're probably just getting started at that sort of age. Your experience is a massive plus, but I think what you've got to bring to it as well is that thirst for self-development and new knowledge. You've got to be learning the whole time, because I think as soon as you stop learning and stop developing, then you become less valuable. So I try and, I mean, every contract there's a load of stuff that I haven't done before, or I've learned, or different environments, or do something better. But I think that's part of the thrill and the adventure of interim work, really, for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. So let's say I've placed you in a role. You've been delivering for 6 months. You've got maybe 2-3 months left. How do you approach the end of your contract?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said, I think keeping in touch with people throughout is a really good thing. I would say I probably do about 8 weeks out. I would, if I haven't got something else lined up, then and it's rare, to be honest, that you have something lined up more than a few weeks out, because interim work, certainly what sort of things I do, tend to move pretty quick. But from sort of about 8 weeks out, I'd be really ramping up my activity in terms of getting in touch with people. I'd have revised my CV. I'd have brushed up my LinkedIn page. I'd probably be more active on LinkedIn in terms of getting visibility out there. I'd be clear about, available from January or October or whenever it is, and really be looking to generate those conversations. So, as I said before, I'm getting front of mind with all the recruiters that I need to, but also probably getting in touch with people in my network who maybe I've worked alongside before, worked for before, and just saying, look, I'm coming available soon. If you hear of anything suitable, please give me a shout. And so it's a question of, it's almost like shaking the tree and seeing what falls out. But I think, you ramp that activity up as you get towards your end date. I think what's important, and I've done it before, is be on a difficult contract that's all encompassing, and literally you get to the end and it's like running a marathon, and you flop over the finish line and sort of collapse, and then only then do you start looking. And of course it typically takes a little bit of time to start generating the opportunities coming back in. So if you want to move seamlessly on, the time to start is sort of 8 weeks out, I'd say, from when your contract finishes. But again, if you're staying front of mind all the time, and some of this depends on your reputation and your, the area you're working in. If there's a lot of demand out there, then your chances of moving straight onto something else are pretty good. But otherwise, you've really got to work for it and generate those opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And the big word that you said there, which jumps out at me, is that word reputation, right? Because it's such an important thing. And I think the good interims out there know that reputation is everything, not just your reputation with me as a recruiter, but within the market you're operating in. And I think it's also really important to keep and to understand that you're still within a role, so you need to keep delivering on that role. And we mentioned referencing earlier. Probably my most important question when I'm taking a reference on someone is, how well did they perform at the end of their contract? Did they tie up all the loose ends? Did they do a good handover? Because certainly it's a big frustration with a lot of my clients when I'm talking about an interim, is they'll say, well, he was great during the contract, but as soon as he got another role, or we were approaching the last few weeks, he sort of switched off and didn't really deliver for me. So for that reason, I perhaps wouldn't take him back. So that's a really important thing, is that it all goes back to that first point of, you need to be delivering in the contract for the whole contract until it ends.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that's really important.
Yeah, great stuff. Super. Well, I think we've covered some really important stuff there, and hopefully some people will find that very useful. Is there anything else you'd sort of give as a top tip to maybe a budding interim?
I think I sort of mentioned it before about the relationship I I particularly in a difficult market, it's very easy to get frustrated. And what I would say to people is, you know, I see it on LinkedIn a lot of people who are, you know, they're using it as a bit of a platform to rant about this, that, and the other. You know, occasionally it's fine, but you know, if that's all you're putting out there is negativity and anger, just be very conscious of that, because again, you know, everyone sees that. It's the sort of first thing I'm sure you, when you're looking at a candidate, will check out their LinkedIn, what's on their, you know, what's on their profile, and the sort of things they post. But just, you know, I've had plenty of bad experiences with recruiters for whatever reason. But I would say just be always be positive going into relationships, and give people the benefit of the doubt. I would say, you know, you'll work out over time who the good guys and the not so good guys are. And I think it's again, coming back to this point of understanding the difficulty of the recruiter's job, because you're dealing with a client who might change their mind, you know, 5 times a week, and you know, and get you to do loads of work, not pay you, and then take an internal candidate, all these sorts of things. So understanding that dynamic of how challenging it is to recruit and run a successful recruitment agency is also really useful, and definitely maintain that positivity, because you know, I think having a good network of recruiters who understand you and you know, and think they can place you is really useful. And those opportunities, you know, they might not come along immediately, might not come along in the first couple of years as an interim, but at some stage you will start getting phone calls, and you know, it's really worthwhile. So definitely, you know, continue that effort and continue it with a positive outlook, I would say, is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just to, I guess, re-emphasize, not even add too much to that, because you summed it up quite nicely. I think everything we've covered there is really important. So all those things about being transparent and open with the recruiter is really important. Maintaining communication. You know, my phone number is not a secret, and anyone that wants to chat and tell me what they're up to, they're always welcome. Yeah, you know, ultimately my job is to find you the best role, and make sure you succeed in that role, and then move on to the next one, really. Great stuff. Lovely. Well, yeah, unless there's anything you want to add there, I think we've covered most of it. Just quickly, how can people sort of find you, keep tabs on you?
LinkedIn is probably the best place. So it's David Estyn-Jones, ESTYN-Jones on LinkedIn. But yeah, connect, follow, send me a message. I also run a group on LinkedIn for interims called the Interim Incubator. And I've got about 600-700 members on that, but it's designed as a bit of a community for, particularly for people starting out in interim work. So do come and look that up, and that's hopefully quite useful.
Yeah, and my advice to everyone out there who's either in the interim market or thinking of is give David a follow, because you put some really good advice out there, and yeah, you're a good sounding board, I'm sure, for anyone who's in the market. Lovely. All right. Well, thank you very much, David. Thanks for your time. I'm
Brilliant.
Peter. Any NHS interims out there, please do get in touch. But yeah, nice to talk to you, and look forward to speaking again.
Cheers, Peter. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Bye.